I've really delved into a lot of Doctor Who at the moment, and one company that I've delved into recently, and I'm gonna do a little segment on my podcast as well, is called here we go. There's my script there for the little structure I have for the podcast. Time of Big Finish, where I give you a little thought on Big Finish, talking about this company here. So for those who are wondering what this is about, so I've delved into not just the TV stuff of Doctor Who, I've also delved into the expanded media, which of course includes stuff like, say, books, or perhaps comic books, or of course your audio dramas. Now, Big Finish is this independent audio company. I'm pretty sure they're still independent, but to summarize as to what um, they are a company that has been around for a number of years. And in 1999, they were able to get the license from the BBC to do officially licensed Doctor Who audio dramas. Once they got that going, they then started doing the monthly range, where if I was to get round to finding it here, there we go, monthly adventures. So this was the first thing they did really for Doctor Who audios, where they basically got actors from the classic series reprising their roles as the Doctor, as well as also actors who played the companions. You also have some villains coming back, like the Master or Davros, basically reprising their roles for these audio dramas, where you have these actors all playing the role of the Doctor and the companion, and returning as these roles. And you have them just like you have it started with the monthly range, where they get these actors to reprise their roles, and they've done it in the structure. They originally did it in the structure of classic series. They then moved on to further territory as well. So the monthly adventures was their first one, where the name implied that they released once a month a story featuring just a Doctor and companion pairing. They've done ones with the Fifth Doctor, the Sixth Doctor. The Sixth Doctor got an original companion as well, called Evelyn Smythe, which I haven't listened to yet, but I will get round to listening to it. You also have some fun pairs, like there's the Fifth Doctor here with Nyssa, where basically during like season 19 and season 20, which is like the first season of the Fifth Doctor, which is season 19, at the end of that season, the Fifth Doctor and Nyssa would take off in the TARDIS, and they basically left Tegan, who was a companion of the Fifth Doctor, Australian air hostess. They left her at Heathrow Airport. She wanted to go there originally, but then she missed the TARDIS, and the TARDIS travels along. So then, when we get to season 20, the start of the next season, the second season of the Fifth Doctor, the Fifth Doctor and Nyssa are just the only two traveling together for a bit, and then Tegan tags along eventually. But basically, Big Finish decided, you know what, we'll fill in that gap. They filled in loads of gaps. They even filled in a gap with the Fifth Doctor and Perry, who only had two stories together. There was the Planet on Fire, and then there's the final story with the Fifth Doctor, Caves Androzani. So they're like, we're gonna fit that in. We're gonna fit that gap in. Some people aren't as much a fans of that one because of a lot of detailed reasons surrounding Caves Androzani, which I won't get into. But yeah, they've done a number of these audios throughout the years, and they started with the monthly range, and then they've moved on to box sets with these doctors as well as other doctors. So eventually, in 2015, when the revival, when Doctor Who came back, series one was turning 10 years old, they were given the license to do stuff in the modern series. So they've been doing a number of modern works, ranging from the 10th Doctor to even stuff like Torchwood. They've given Torchwood, the adult sci-fi spin-off I mentioned, having audios as well. They have their own monthly range as well, which are kind of like bottle audios, where they've given kind of characters, where they usually give about one character or two an audio in the Tortured range, where they just get them to go ahead and basically just they basically go ahead and they just get them to be in a little adventure surrounding the little adventure with these a little adventure that has the same sort of tone of Torture, which is telling adult mature sci-fi stories. So that's pretty darn cool. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm going to do a segment on my podcast talking about, and maybe reviewing at least, one audio within Big Finish, the audio company. And I wanted to start off talking about a series on Big Finish that I kind of started listening to. So I mentioned before the monthly range. And one particular Doctor that I've listened to in the monthly range is the Eighth Doctor. Now, to give a little context, I mentioned before that the Eighth Doctor had the TV movie, which was back in 1996, and basically he was in that movie. He had one singular film, and then when Doctor Who came back in 2005, there was the Ninth Doctor. And so basically, if I was to summarize what had happened, the Fifth Doctor, the Eighth Doctor, sorry, apologies for that, but the Eighth Doctor would not return in series one. Instead, it's just the Ninth Doctor established as the Ninth Doctor. There was no regeneration for the Eighth Doctor yet. There is one now with a mini episode they did in 2013, but for a long time, the Eighth Doctor was mostly just, not given a regeneration story. Now, when Big Finish acquired the license for classic Doctor Who, they had the latest Doctor at that point would be the Eighth Doctor in 1999, so they did a couple of audios with the fifth, sixth, and seventh Doctors, and then in 2001 they started releasing Eighth Doctor monthly adventures. They started releasing Eighth Doctor audios within this monthly range. So yeah, this is the movie right here. So the movie was released back in 1996, as I said, and it was not exactly a massive success. So just moving that thing out of the way. So Paul McGann was the Eighth Doctor here. He regenerated from Sylvester McCoy in this film. It was set in America, and it was a co-production with Fox. He was with Grace, this character who was an American character. He also had this character Lee as well, and this very weird-looking guy here is the Master, the enemy of the Doctor, who's the same race as the Doctor, but is like the Doctor, but as the name implies, Master wants to control the universe more so, and has evil plans. And this is one that was this is an incarnation of the Master that was only in the movie and was played by Eric Roberts, who the American actor playing the role. And I think number of people may not like him. I kind of I enjoy him, but it is funny because there's a bit in the film where he acts very much like the Terminator. He's got the leather jacket. He's got sunglasses. There's a scene where it's just like the Terminator scene of Arnie saying, "I'll be back," but it's Eric Roberts as the Master just camping up the scene. But the thing is with that movie is, even if that movie wasn't the most successful thing and fans have criticized it, I personally do enjoy it actually, and I think it's an enjoyable film. The one thing that most people did say was great was Paul McGann. So in 2001, after Big Finish decided to put him in the monthly range, where he had his own set of adventures where he travels with companion Charlotte Pollard, played by India Fisher here. And this is some artwork. This is not necessarily. This isn't really. This isn't Paul McGann sided actually with India Fisher. They basically plopped her with images from the movie, publicity images with the movie. So you may not recognize her face, but you might recognize her voice because India Fisher is probably best known as the narrator on MasterChef in the UK. Yes, this is who she is. And she was also, I remember, on Pointless Celebrities with Nicholas Briggs. They were paired up together on Pointless Celebrities. And Nick Briggs is one of the heads of Big Finish, one of the main people involved. And also recognize his voice as well because he's the voice of the Daleks. He's the current voice of the Daleks for Doctor Who in the TV series, and of course does the voice of the Daleks for Big Finish if they're ever doing Dalek audios. But basically, India Fisher was cast as a companion with the Eighth Doctor, where they travel together in stories. This is set after the TV movie, where the Eighth Doctor meets Charley Pollard, and they go on adventures together. And I wanted to go ahead and detail my recommendations for the Eighth Doctor monthly adventures, and share my overall thoughts on these audios. So the first one is Storm Warning. This is the first audio in the Eighth Doctor's series on Big Finish, and I would say personally, for me, actually, this is one of my recommendations and is actually one of my favorites in the first two series I am listening to. I'll explain later what's going on with the first two, why I'm not listening to the rest of it. But basically, Storm Warning is a really, really solid opening episode audio within the Eighth Doctor, where you have him traveling on his own at the start, and he eventually finds himself encountering these vortisaurs, to describe them, they're these space pterodactyls, basically. They look like space pterodactyls. or at least that's how the audio goes, obviously, and they describe them as like that. And they eventually are the Eighth Doctor finds himself eventually after encountering them. He finds himself uh putting his TARDIS in the R-101, which is a real life airship that, like the Hindenburg airship, unfortunately crashed in a storm and it would, kill everyone on board. And in the R-101, he meets Charley, who disguises herself as one of the workers on the R-101. But eventually she gets caught and quickly gets caught, and eventually she runs away and encounters the Eighth Doctor, and they work together, paired up together, and this leads to the Eighth Doctor meeting, of course, his new companion. And this overall was a very enjoyable story. It's not something that I would say is top tier Doctor Who, but I think it's a really enjoyable introduction to this range. And Paul McGann, I think, is really terrific at the start of this audio. I really enjoy his performance here. He has a great bit of energy there, and it's really terrific. And what I like about what I like also about this audio as well is it has a good story where it's not too complicated. It does a great job in being very much a pilot episode for essentially this brand new set of adventures with the Eighth Doctor, where it's not trying to be anything too big or too bombastic for like the first audio featuring the Eighth Doctor paired for the Eighth Doctor's first series, first like adventure on Big Finish. It has a nice way of being a good like opening story and also a good starting point for people who haven't really listened to a lot of Big Finish, where you have him just on this plot where it starts out as an R101 ship, and the Vortisaurs do come into the story as well. They come paired up, and there's also an interesting storyline actually involved with this airship, and you have a nice set of characters with the Eighth Doctor and Charley as well that are crew on the ship. You have the captain, who's a very likable sort of character who is very stern, very strict, but he's also a likable enough character. He's not trying to be too harsh or anything. You also have Rathbone, I believe his name is. He's this very he's very much this slimy sneer. He's a slimy, not very likable character, and the audio kind of knows it, and he kind of becomes he's kind of not the most likable character, but he's entertaining to listen to. And I think also Charley is great as well, and I think she's immediately likable from the get-go. You just find her as this very lovely character who has this very big desire to just be this Edwardian adventuress. She wants to travel to like across the world, and her chemistry with Paul McGann is really great as well. And that's the main thing you can enjoy about these audios. This chemistry between these two are really wonderful to listen to, and I personally find them to be an enjoyable companion Doctor duo. Maybe not one of my personal favorites, but I do enjoy listening to them. I enjoy just having them paired up, and they do have some fun banter together throughout the series of audios. So I would say that I personally do recommend Storm Warning as well, not just for the first story with the Eighth Doctor, but it's just an overall entertaining, enjoyable story, and probably the best one in the first series of Eighth Doctor audios with Charley. There's about there are four of them. So this is 1 out of 4 audios, and this is the best one. This isn't to say the other ones are bad, but I personally think this is the best one. And there's a plot line that comes along with the R101 where there is a bit more complexity later on, where the airship becomes more involved with a science fiction element, and that becomes quite interesting. And it's interesting also seeing how the R101 kind of crashes. You get to listen how it crashes, and you get to realize what's going on and how the airship crashes, and that's particularly interesting. Going through this audio and seeing how the R101 crashes, where the sci-fi plot actually fits within the real history of this airship that actually did crash in history. And what basically happens in this audio is it also sets up this arc that comes along in these first 2 series, where I won't give anything too much away, but basically, because the Doctor, of course, travels with Charley, he saves her from the R101 ship, where she was meant to die in the R101 ship. She was one of the passengers that was meant to crash in the R101 ship, but unfortunately she didn't. And because of that, it leads to a storyline where the Eighth Doctor mentions a number of times the web of time, which is this web that is meant to, contain time together. Time is meant to work correctly, but then suddenly the web is getting broken apart because of a piece of history being altered. It's the same sort of thing as what you might have heard before, kind of similar to say like the Doctor Who episode The Waters of Mars, where the 10th Doctor is in that episode, the 10th Doctor encounters a crew in the near future that is all meant to die, and he's not meant to save any of them. So there's that difficulty where he has to go ahead and let history take its place. And that's the question that happens a number of times in Doctor Who, where the idea of, do you save a life of people that are meant to die? Some people, would you save the life of someone that you cared about, even if it meant that history would be completely altered? It's a similar thing that other time travel works have been done before. Like, it's a similar thing to the butterfly effect. You step on a butterfly, history is completely altered and changed about. And this is what sets it up. And it's an interesting little setup to see what happens. And you also have the Vortisaur, one Vortisaur coming along as well into the story as well, which is interesting. And I won't give too much away about regarding that Vortisaur, but that comes into the storyline of the episode. And yeah, it's a solid episode, and Paul McGann I do enjoy. I enjoy India Fisher and her chemistry with Paul McGann, and there's some nice characters in this story as well. And it manages to be interesting with its plot line, whilst also not being too complex, where, because this is the first audio of Paul McGann as the Doctor, it manages to be not too complicated. So I think also for those who want an introduction to early Big Finish, this is a good listen. And I will say as well, on Spotify and Apple Music, you can listen to early Doctor Who monthly range Big Finish, the first 50. So the audios I'm mentioning here that I'm going to all mention are for free on Apple Music and Spotify. If you go onto Apple Music, which I use, you just type in Doctor Who, and there's an artist called Doctor Who, and that's basically the little that's the art. That's not really an artist, it's more so the section where you have all of the monthly range of Doctor Who is on there. You also have other spin-offs as well, having their own separate artists, and they're all for free to listen to, which I will get onto another time. But for now, I'm just going to mention that you can listen to the first 50 in the monthly range. So moving on from that, there's Sword of Orion, which I personally would say about this audio is that it's one that I think gets better as it progresses. This is written by Nicholas Briggs as well, who actually he voices the Cybermen in this audio. The Cybermen are the alien that you see, well, the villain that you see here on the cover. This, I think, was apparently Big Finish's first audio in the monthly range to feature the Cybermen. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Cybermen. I have a Cybermen up above the shelf actually. From 2006, like David Tennant, 10th Doctor look Cybermen. But many of you will be familiar, of course, with this monster. They're probably the most famous, aside from the Daleks. They're people who have been converted into these metal men. And Sword of Orion is the the second audio with the Eighth Doctor and Charley, and also the first time that the Cybermen get used. It's written by Nicholas Briggs and Stu Bagful, a YouTuber who does a series about the Eighth Doctor, did a section about Sword of Orion where he basically talked about how, because this was kind of like the first audio with the Cybermen on Big Finish, Nicholas Briggs kind of said, they're meant to be scary, and you get a sense where they are trying to really emphasize the fear factor with them being, killing people, and you don't of course see it, but you can imagine sort of these quite horrible punches and guts or blood being spilled about. It's like quite dark stuff. I mean, Big Finish is known for being able to get away with more than the television work, so that's what you have here with Sword of Orion. So with this story, what I'll say about this is, I said, it gets better as it goes along, because I think for the first part it's a bit tricky with all the things going around, where I had a bit of difficulty trying to imagine, as I was closing my eyes listening to this audio. It is tricky to sometimes imagine fully what's going on. Oh, okay, this is happening. Okay, there's this setting, this location, all these things going around. But then as it progresses, I got used to it, and I really got engaged with the story as it progressed along. One thing I'll though say about Sword of Orion is that one thing about it is that it is a bit too similar to other It is a bit similar to other storylines with the Cybermen. So the two that came to my mind were Earthshock and Tomb of the Cybermen. Now, I haven't watched Tomb of the Cybermen, which is a second Doctor story, from like the 1960s. But it has the idea of, tombs being reawoken and Cybermen, wanting to be resurrected from their tombs. I believe that's what the storyline was. And then there's also Earthshock, and this is a story I have watched, and it's with the Fifth Doctor. The similarity mainly comes from the stern female captain of a crew, like a garbage sort of crew, like similar to Earthshock with a similar crew, trying to take down the Cybermen, and you have a very stern woman in charge. It has a similar sort of plots and feel to it that's similar to the storyline with the Cybermen in Earthshock. So that's the main thing I'll say about it. It gets better as it progresses along, the plot gets a bit more interesting, and I did engage with it by the end of it. I did actually enjoy it quite a bit, but it is a bit similar to similar other Cybermen stories, and also the storyline kind of it took a while to visualize from the first part. So yeah, the storyline's a bit similar to other Cybermen storylines, and also the audio took a bit of time for me to visualize with the first part. The third story is Stones of Venice, and I personally thought this was a pretty enjoyable story. I'll say it's a good one for Charlie's character because you have her going ahead and so the plot synopsis surrounding this is that basically in this story, what I'll say about this is in Stones of Venice, the Doctor takes Charlie to basically a city, Venice in Italy, and as they go to it, they go to the far future. This is written by Paul Maggers, and it sees the Eighth Doctor take Charlie to the far future when Venice, the city, is going to sink and it's going to fall completely into the water. And as they go along to this plot thread, there's also a bit of an interesting storyline involving a romance that had happened in the past and finding out exactly what had happened. And you also have Charlie and the Eighth Doctor kind of splitting up, where the Eighth Doctor is figuring out the storyline involving the history of Venice and discovering the history behind it and the leader of Venice. And at the same time, you also have him paired up with this person who owns, I believe, an art museum in Venice. And as well as that, then you have Charlie being paired up with someone else who takes Charlie along and tags her along to become part of this plot line to discover what's going on in Venice. And it's a good story for Charlie in terms of her character, not being with the Doctor, and you see her character on her own, taking her own actions into her own hands, and not fully being supportive of what's going on with the plot line. And that's particularly good to go through. However, I do think this story has some good elements to it, but it's not something that really stands out to me. It's just enjoyable, fun sort of story. The one thing as well about it, as well as with the cover art, it kind of indicates that one of the issues surrounding this is, even though this is set in the near future, the far future of Venice, there's the issue where it does act more historical and more of a historical story, a story set more so in the past with castles and early and old architect in Venice and palaces. It acts more like a story set within the past and the future, so it is a bit odd that it does have that kind of feel to it, even though it's meant to be set in the far future. But I still found it to be overall pretty enjoyable, but nothing that I think really, really stands out. But then afterwards, we get the conclusion to series 1 of the Eighth Doctor Adventures, which is Minuet in Hell. And this one's very, very big and very, very bizarre. So how would I summarize this one? It's difficult to describe it, but if I was to describe it, it's the Doctor and Charlie end up in America in, I believe, the near future, or at least the near future of this story. And basically, because this is and I say near future in this story because these audios came out in 2001, so I think this is probably like set within almost America's past. But there's a person, I believe, coming to be elected in a town in America, and he has a group of women known as the Hellfire Club, with, I believe, prostitutes or something like that. And Charlie becomes part of that, and then the Eighth Doctor here gets a memory loss, and he has to figure out, and he doesn't fully remember at the start who he is, and he's in this mental asylum. And then you also have the Brigadier, who is an old friend of the Doctor, played by Nicholas Courtney once again, which is nice, but he does interact with the Eighth Doctor a bit, but not to give too much away. But I'll say that Unfortunately, if you're looking for the Eighth Doctor to interact with the Brigadier a lot, you're not really going to get a lot of that. And what you're going to get is, I believe, a story that was written by Gary Russell, where it's very, very bizarre and very, very bonkers. One that I think is also quite long. It's a bit longer than the others. And it's also one that I think isn't one that is going to be the most divisive of the series. It's very divisive, and it's one that I think may turn off a lot of people. It won't be exactly something that will be too enjoyable. It has references to the Hellfire Club, as I mentioned. So there's not a full like reference to prostitution or anything, but it's about women being hired to do work for men, I believe. And Charlie becoming part of that is a bit crazy and bizarre. And it's a very, very big, bizarre audio that I can't fully describe because it basically involves the Doctor and Charlie. They have memory loss and they're set in different positions and they have to figure out what's going on. And it does include a plot thread that's been going over throughout this series, and that's pretty good. But and as a conclusion to it, it is very, very bizarre and very, very bonkers. One that I think has some good elements to it, but also it's very much out there and very, very bizarre in a lot of different ways because of just the plot line involving Satan, satanic imagery, big exaggerated American accents, and also having this storyline of stuff like demons and Hellfire Club prostitution sort of thing. And it's a very, very, very bizarre, very mixed bag of an audio. One that I think I kind of enjoyed, but also thought was very bizarre, very odd. And one thing I do like is that whilst there is some creative aspects surrounding the Eighth Doctor, I also think, which I won't give away too much, but it also involves him and someone who he's in the asylum with, who's kind of like someone he's in the mental asylum with, played by Nicholas Briggs of all people. He's not putting on any sort of voice, but he's just having his regular voice, and that's pretty cool. But there's an interesting plot thread surrounding him and the Eighth Doctor, Nicholas Briggs' character in the Eighth Doctor. I can't remember fully what his name is, but I'll search up. Oh. Gideon Crane. Okay, that was his name. So Gideon is an interesting character with the Eighth Doctor. There's an interesting storyline. But the one thing I'll say about this is that, unfortunately, the Eighth Doctor has a bit of a memory loss, as I said. And this is something that is one of the main things that I'm kind of not too much of a fan of, because the movie, basically, if I was to go back to that, in that movie, the Eighth Doctor, for a while in that story, does have memory loss after he regenerates from the Seventh Doctor. So it just comes across as a bit of a repetitive element that's been reused again. So this is a very bizarre one. I would say that my recommendations for Series 1 are Storm Warning and Sword of Orion. I think Stones of Venice is just decent, nothing too much amazing, but it's fine enough. And I think Minuet and Hell is something that I would recommend only if you're okay with just some very bizarre bonkers elements coming into the way. And I won't be surprised if some of you get put off by this audio, because it's one that is definitely not one for everyone. It's not one that's going to be like, oh, it's just the Brigadier and the Eighth Doctor in America, but it's not as much like that. I will say Nicholas Courtney, it is nice to listen to him as the Brigadier, the late great Nicholas Courtney, who was a really good companion to the Eighth Doctor. It's nice to listen to him again, but yeah, it's a very, very bizarre audio. So let's talk about Series 2. Series 2, I mean, I've got a bit of time, so I'm just going to try and not go over time. So Invaders from Mars, I'll summarize these quite quickly as much as I can, but Invaders from Mars, I think, is a decent enough story. It's another one set in America that has an interesting plot line. It's written by Mark Gatiss, where the Eighth Doctor is paired up with the Eighth Doctor and Charlie are involved in a plot line where it connects the War of the Worlds broadcast that was quite famous that Orson Welles did, where a lot of America thought that there was a real alien invasion coming along. Well, this kind of puts on the idea of what if there kind of almost was an alien invasion linked with that. So that's a bit interesting, and I do find that to be quite a bit interesting, but it's overall just an okay, decent enough story, but nothing crazy or special. But I will say it is nice to see Simon Pegg and Jessica Stevenson in this, who are best known for playing the main characters in Spaced. So that's pretty cool seeing them coming to the frame. Now, Simon Pegg was in Doctor Who. Actually, both of them were in Doctor Who. They did come into the actual revival Doctor Who. But in this one, they're playing American accents. And it's a bit interesting and funny just hearing Simon Pegg put on an American accent. But overall, this is just an okay story, but a decent enough story, but nothing that I would say that really stands out. Like, it's not perhaps maybe as good as Storm Warning in being a really enjoyable. It's enjoyable enough, but it's nothing that was like on. It's not as good as maybe Storm Warning, which I thought was a really solid introduction to this series. But then we get to the next one. So I've mentioned. So this has a couple of different cover arts, this, but Chimes of Midnight is often cited as a classic, and for many people who have listened to Big Finish on Doctor Who. And this is written by Robert Shearman, a very beloved writer of Doctor Who. So Paul McGann, India Fisher, Charley, they of course star in this story. And this, by the way, is a this cover art here that you also see here. So to summarize what's going on here. So basically, this was the original cover art. Then they re-released it on vinyl with spare parts, another Big Finish audio, where basically they chose two very beloved Doctor Who stories within the monthly range that were considered by many fans as some of the best in the monthly range, in the early monthly range. And the two that got chosen to be re-released on vinyl were Spare Parts and Chimes of Midnight. This one here, this cover art here I have, is basically a listening party where this was during lockdown when basically for the lockdown, fans of Doctor Who would rewatch old episodes and type online to share their thoughts, which is quite cool. And on the 1st of May, they got Robert Shearman and India Fisher, who plays Charley, to go ahead and tweet about this story as they're listening to it. So it was basically a re-listen to this. The hashtag was basically to let people know you were listening to the story and to connect it together. And it was a fun little event there. I'll explain the plum pudding quickly, but Chimes of Midnight getting a re-release on vinyl with Spare Parts. I haven't listened to Spare Parts, but there's a reason why Chimes of Midnight got a re-release on vinyl, because this is easily, in my opinion, the best so far I've listened to. This is an amazing story that I recommend so highly. So to summarize the plot line, this is set during a Christmas time where basically the Eighth Doctor and Charley are in this house where they investigate, and they find themselves in this house where they're figuring out that time is acting a bit odd, where the chimes on a clock, when it reaches to midnight, what happens is then something bizarre happens where eventually the Eighth Doctor and Charley suddenly are transported to like the past of this house, and they find themselves interacting with people in this house that happen to be basically are people that used to work and live in this house and are connected to this house. And what happens is these people seem to know who the Eighth Doctor and Charley is. They know who the Doctor and Charley is, and they seem to believe that the Doctor and Charley, they describe them as the famous detective of the Doctor of Scotland Yard. And the Doctor isn't too sure what's going on, and they don't, and neither does Charley. They're figuring out, why are we known to be part of a murder? Why are we seemingly known by these people and also happen to be viewed by them as detectives, figure out a murder mystery? Because basically, whenever the clock hits midnight, the chimes hit, that basically results in someone in the house getting murdered. And the funny thing is about it is it's actually quite comedic whilst also being quite scary. Surprisingly, it's actually quite funny with how some of these people end up in their fates. It's almost akin to a very spooky but comedic Agatha Christie murder mystery, and it's very effective at doing that. I haven't really watched any Agatha Christie murder mysteries, but I have seen like Knives Out, and it's quite effective at doing that. And its atmosphere is also terrific, where it's both haunting and quite creepy with what's going on in the house, but at the same time, it also has some really great, witty, fun dialogue from Robert Shearman that really works. And the emotions work really well, where it's both really funny and also really emotional. And the emotions mainly come from Charley, because this is a great story for her, and India Fisher does a great job performing here, as well as Paul McGann and the rest of the cast as well. And the main thing about India Fisher, with Charley, without giving it away, is that basically Charley has to this house is almost connected in a way to Charlie's past. So this does connect to the story arc of the Web of Time that was mentioned in Storm Warning, but this isn't something that. But you can still listen to this, even if you haven't really listen to the other audios. And with Charley, you get to explore a bit of her past, and it's really interesting and fascinating listening to what happens and how the story unfolds is really terrific. This was my second listening to it, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it before, but after listening to the other ones, I also really enjoyed it as well. And that's why I'd say also it'd be good to listen to the other stories and then go around to this. And I think you can also listen to this on its own as well. It's absolutely wonderful. I think this is head and shoulders the best one out of the bunch. Full recommendation for me. This is an amazing, amazing story. And actually, the next story, The Seasons of Fear, which is by Paul Cornell, who previously had written he's written before for Doctor Who with Father's Day is one example. He's also written for the story of what else did he write for Father's Day, and also wrote for Human Nature and the Family of Blood. He's written other Doctor Who books as well. But basically, Seasons of Fear is probably the second best, is in my opinion the second one. If Chimes of Midnight is the best one, this is the silver medal. This is the second best one. And I think because of Chimes of Midnight, it kind of got overshadowed by that story. But I would say don't sleep on it. It's a really good story as well. This is a really fun, enjoyable story where the Eighth Doctor and Charley, the Eighth Doctor takes Charley to Singapore, where in Storm Warning, basically, she promised Charley to take her there because Charley was planning to go there originally. And that's kind of why she went on the R101, because it could get her to Singapore. And then what happened is, or at least it was taking her somewhere near, I think, where she could travel to Singapore. But basically, what happens is the Eighth Doctor encounters a person who seems to know who he is, but the Doctor doesn't fully know who he is. Basically, where basically the Eighth Doctor meets someone that he doesn't recognize, but this person seems to really know and have a deep hatred towards the Doctor, and the Doctor has to figure out exactly what's going on. And in my opinion, this was a really solid story that I would describe as akin to if Stephen Moffat basically wrote a story for the monthly range with the Eighth Doctor. So I found out as well that it was Paul Cornell and also Caroline Simcox. They both wrote the story as a co-writing collaboration. But anyways, so the person that they meet is Grey Lyle, is the person that the Eighth Doctor and Charley have to stop, where they travel through different periods in time and keep interacting with Grey Lyle. And it's a very interesting story with the timey-wimey elements. And I found it to be really engaging to listen to. That has a really interesting bit to it. The only thing I would say maybe is that the twist monster at the end is nice and interesting, but also they aren't given too much screen time. But I will say that Grey Lyle, who is played here by Stephen Perring, is really solid and a really great villain for the Eighth Doctor, and helps to make this a very fun story. And as I said, it's like if Stephen Moffat came in and wrote this story, because it's very timey-wimey, playing around with time, and I enjoyed it a lot. The next one, Embrace the Darkness, is overall a pretty solid story that has the Eighth Doctor and Charley go onto this ship where there's an alien species that's coming in, where it's telling to embrace the darkness. And it's a very creepy story at some points, where basically when there's there's a spaceship crew that is being taken by this alien force, and what happens is their eyesight is suddenly gone, as in their eyes are completely gone. Their face is everything, but they have no eyes. Their eyes are gone. It's very, very bit creepy with the way it's described in this audio. But what I do like about Embrace the Darkness mainly is that whilst I don't think this is an amazing story, I do think that it has a very good bit with the Eighth Doctor and Charley where they're arguing, but it's not a case of bickering or anything like that. It's a case of them basically just it's basically the Eighth Doctor feeling the sense of guilt as the story progresses and as he finds out about what's going on. And then Charley also argues, well, it's not exactly fully your fault, and doesn't like that the Doctor is almost willing to sacrifice himself, and that leads to a very interesting argument. That's in the late half. That's a bit of a spoiler, but I won't give away too much regarding what exactly is happening because that'll give the game away. But the alien species that is revealed, I think, is probably the main thing that I enjoyed about this story. How it eventually turns into an interesting story where the monster and threat isn't necessarily what you entirely think it is, and neither does the Eighth Doctor and Charlie. So there's two more to get through. I'm going to quickly go through those to not spend too much time. But speaking of time, we have Time of the Daleks, and this is the Eighth Doctor's first encounter with the Daleks. And I thought this story was overall just an okay story, but there are some interesting elements surrounding it where you have the Eighth Doctor and Charlie encounter. This is kind of almost a precursor to what comes to the next audio, where you have bits of the Web of Time coming into the fold, and basically what happens is the Daleks are seemingly working with humans, where one person in charge, she seems to think that the Daleks are helping out in restoring Shakespeare, because basically the storyline involves the storyline of Shakespeare, where Charlie and a lot of people seemingly don't know who William Shakespeare is. And that's what makes, and the Eighth Doctor wonders what exactly is going on. And the storyline with the Daleks does become a bit interesting with the Shakespeare element, but I don't think this was an amazing story. And overall was just an okay story that is mostly interesting for the Eighth Doctor to interact with the Daleks for the first time. And also, of course, you have Shakespeare being involved. But for the most part, I found this to be an okay story, but nothing that really stands out, nothing that really, really amazes me, or nothing that I would say is absolutely incredible, but it still has some solid elements, and I do think that it is interesting seeing Shakespeare involved with the Daleks. And then there's the last one I want to talk about, which is Neverland, which basically this is the concluding story for series 2, and it sees the Eighth Doctor and Charlie's relationship. This, the Web of Time is starting to be unfolded. You start to figure out more about what's going on, and it leads to a storyline involving the Doctor and Charlie going to Gallifrey and meeting the Time Lords to figure out what's going on. And you have also a returning companion with Romana, who is a companion to the Fourth Doctor, played here by Lala Ward, who reprises the role. And she is basically president of Gallifrey, as in president of the entire planet, which is, if you're wondering what Gallifrey is, it's the home planet of the Time Lords, the Doctor's alien race. So Romana is working with the Doctor in this plot line, and what happens is it leads to a storyline where you have Charlie's involvement with, her being saved from the R101, and you also find a bit about this universe that they travel to, almost like akin to this other place that they've traveled to, where you have here this storyline which is seemingly involved in Time Lord lore. It's very heavy in Time Lord lore, so I think this is a story that might be quite big, and there's a number of things that might go over your head. It did for me as well, but there are some elements that I do like about this, and I do think that in comparison to Time of the Daleks, I think this stands out more. This has some really great moments with the Eighth Doctor and Charlie, where the relationship comes to a bit of a tension, where Charlie knows exactly what's fully going to happen, and she knows that she wasn't meant to be saved by the Doctor, and she says that's okay. And the way that the title Neverland comes into the fold at first is really great, in a really well-written scene from Alan Barnes, who wrote Storm Warning. It's a really solid scene, and that's where it has some more scenes that I think really make it stand out and really, really work. And I think those elements help to make this a solid finale. It wasn't like Chimes of Midnight or Seasons of Fear. I think those two are still the best two of this series, and also of the Eighth Doctor and Charlie so far. But I do think that aside from those two, I would say that this one is also really solid, has some really solid elements coming in, and I'll probably give a reason to it, that and maybe Time of the Daleks, but mainly to this one, I think, because this one I think has some elements which went over my head, but there's an interesting storyline coming into the fold, and the villain that gets involved in this, which was hinted at in other stories like Seasons of Fear, I won't give away too much, but they were hinted at before and kind of revealed a little bit. But when it gets fully unveiled and the storyline fully comes to the fold, it makes a very interesting storyline, and it makes a very interesting concept, and also this idea about, Time Lords not feeling fully, they're not fully heroes, and that's kind of something that I do appreciate. Time Lords not being exactly, the nicest of people. They have some dark elements, some dark secrets hidden away that the Doctor even sometimes doesn't know fully about. But yeah, I enjoyed this finale, and it does have a cliffhanger. I won't give away too much, but there is a cliffhanger to this that leads into Zagreus, which is the 50th anniversary, 50th audio in the monthly range, which was released in 2003. It was basically Big Finish's way to celebrate 40 years of Doctor Who at this point. So it's like this is now 20 years ago. But I won't say too much about it, and I personally have to listen to, I think, a couple other audios with the fifth, sixth, and seventh Doctor. So it will take a while for me to get round to Zagreus. But I know it's a very, very debated audio. It's from Gary Russell, who brought Minuet in Hell, so it's another divisive one. But I'm interested to see where the storyline unveils. And even in the weakest stories with the Eighth Doctor and Charley, like Minuet in Hell, for instance, or say Invaders from Mars not being amazing, or Time of the Daleks, for instance, there's still some good ones going through. There's still some good elements that come into the weakest ones. And Embrace the Darkness, for instance, like that's one that I wouldn't say is maybe like as good as Seasons of Fear or Chimes of Midnight, but it's still solid, and I can see the appeal behind it, and I enjoy some really interesting aspects to it. And that's what I think happens with a number of these audios. Even in the weakest of ones, I still would say, like, give them a listen if you enjoy at least the Eighth Doctor and Charley, because you have some good chemistry between these two characters, and you also have some elements, even in the weakest stories, that I think are still conceptually and the way they're done is a bit interesting, even in the weakest of audios. So I had a good time listening to these, and I think I overall would say that I did enjoy actually listening through all of these. And I think even in the weakest of audios, I still had some interesting things to say, and there's some interesting concepts. It's not exactly stories that are the bland, for instance. Like I think maybe you could say Stones of Venice is the most bland, that or Invaders from Mars, but even then, they still had some aspects which I thought, you know what, there's some good things to like. Like there's a moment with Paul McGann, Eighth Doctor, that's pretty interesting. Or Invaders from Mars, for instance, there's a twist surrounding Jessica Stevens' character, who I think is a bit interesting. So I still enjoyed it, and I think overall I had a good time with the Eighth Doctor adventures. And yeah, I had to keep up with time and try not to say too much. I've spent quite a lot of time talking about it. That's kind of why I didn't talk maybe a lot about movies and TV, because I was like, I have a lot to say about the Eighth Doctor and audio, so I will give my full thoughts on this.